We've had a front row view of how powerful tech can be and how disruptive can it be to the status quo in this sector. Fundraising is super tough and it's a very salesy process. There's very limited scope for being very transparent. It gives me a lot of confidence when I look at the team and I see top tier talent. Those people are actually operating and living a struggle to build it every single day. We want to be the first call whenever they have good and bad news. Nory is the best placed solution to serve the customers because the founder has built the solution for himself. So when you pair that huge market with insider knowledge, that starts to look like a great investment for us.
Welcome back to What's Cooking, the show where we pull back the curtain on what it really takes to run, scale, and systemize a modern hospitality business. Today's episode is a little bit different. Nory has just closed our $37 million Series B funding round, led by Kinnevik, a European growth investor with a track record of backing some of the world's most transformative companies, such as Zalando and Pleo, and most recently Spring Health, TravelPerk, and Muse. Joining me is Jose Gaytan de Ayala, a growth and venture investor at Kinnevik. We talk about why Kinnevik focuses on investing in companies that disrupt outdated industries and what it takes for a scale-up like Nory to convince a world-class VC firm that it's ready for the next stage. So let's get into it. Jose, welcome to What's Cooking. Special episode we have today, a little bit different than the normal episodes, but pumped to have you here. And before we get started, it'd be awesome if you could give us a brief introduction into yourself, kind of your career to date, high level, and how you came to be at your role in Kinnevik.
Absolutely. So my name is Jose. I'm an investment manager at Kinnevik. I've been here for a bit over 2 years now. I lead our software investments in Europe. I have a widely unexciting background. If you ask me, I'm the most traditional plain vanilla investor you'll find. So I'm an engineer by trade. I started my career in investment banking back in 2016 at a bank that no longer exists called Credit Suisse. I was there for about 4 years before moving on into early stage investing. I then went over to the US, did my MBA at MIT, and I arrived back in London to work at Kinnevik, where I've been for the past 2 years. At Kinnevik, I've been very lucky to partner with some of the most exciting software companies in Europe. We've done a number of investments in the last few years that sort of led us to Nory, and that's the background to why we're having this conversation, right?
Very cool. Yeah, we'll get a bit deeper into that as we go. For those who are the uninitiated, what is Kinnevik?
Kinnevik is, unlike most of the investors you typically meet, we are not structured as a fund. We are a permanent capital vehicle. But to all intents and purposes, we primarily work as a growth equity fund. So what that means, we invest in software businesses, typically Series B onwards. We tend to invest 25 to 100 million tickets on an entry. And we invest around three main thematics. So bio and health is one of the three, then software, which is the one I spend my time on. And then finally, climate tech, which is our newest strategy. I think it's important to mention again that permanent capital structure, because I think it typically goes unnoticed if you're outside of the financial world, see how much it affects our sourcing, our investment, and then how we manage our companies. I think the fact that we're structured like that allows us to have a very long-term view of our investments. I think our average holding period is around double or triple the period of any other investor out there. And at the same time, it gives us a lot of flexibility into how we come into a company, right? And what that means for the companies that we invest in is, one, a long-term partner that is there for the long term and that can support you with sometimes non-obvious investments in the short term that might not pay off until very very much later in your investment life. So we're usually the voice around the board and the room that is pushing you to make that investment that has, an ROI that it's probably only going to be realized in a couple of years.
Nice.
And at the same time, we run a pretty concentrated portfolio. So today we have an asset base of around $4 or $5 billion. About $1 billion on that is cash, and that's only distributed within 20 to 30 companies, right? So that's a lot of dollars behind the companies, and it allows us to take that extremely concentrated approach that we think is the only way to really make money in venture.
Yeah. Super interesting. For those who aren't familiar, a lot of the venture investors have a 7 to 10 year kind of investment window or a paradigm how they think about when they enter to when they need to exit. And what you're saying around permanent capital is you can think even more long term than that.
So the way it usually works is funds fundraise as well as companies do. And what LPs are looking for is an investment period and then a divestment period. That's called the life of a fund. Since we don't have traditional LPs in that sense, we can actually hold companies for longer. And there's a very good reason for this, which is many of the funds lose on the best years of a company because they need to divest it too early.
So you mentioned the different thematics that you have, and software being your kind of modus operandi. Even within that, you've had a focus on maybe some legacy industries that can be disrupted, specifically hospitality, where Nory plays, and travel. What's interesting about those spaces to you?
The reason why we arrived to this hospitality and tech thesis is, for Europe, the hospitality sector is a huge one. I think for many countries is actually, if not the largest, the second largest industry, particularly when you look into some of the more Mediterranean countries. And it's wild to think that at the same time, being such a key strategic sector for Europe, it's widely under-digitized. It always blows my mind when we're looking at companies and we're doing our due diligence and we are thinking about, let's see how this process is managed right now at this company. And it keeps on surprising that most of the customers are still using Excel and pen and paper to carry out their workloads.
Crazy analog.
Yeah, and I would say that we've had a front row view of how powerful tech can be and how disruptive can it be to the status quo in this sector, particularly when we look at what Muse and Travelberg have been able to achieve in their respective sectors into bringing that sort of 21st century grade experience to the users. It almost forces us to rethink, okay, what are the next big sector that is going to have that breakout company to bring that same experience under the hood in that subsector, right? Which is, again, what we saw in Nory that really attracted us.
Yeah, really interesting. Those companies you mentioned as well were serious breakouts. So should we expect to see more in the travel hospitality space?
At least one more.
At least one more. Okay, cool. Suppose moving into the process. So as an investor, you mentioned your ticker range. Usually you're a bit later stage, growth stage, as you might call it. What do you look for in the founders of companies to decide whether it's interesting or not?
It's a very good question. I think there's three things that we obsess about when examining a founder at Kinnevik. The first one is we look for founders that have an unfair advantage in their sector. I think this is super key, particularly when you're thinking about vertical software companies. We really like to see a founder that deeply understands the industry that they're trying to build into. That unfair advantage is one of the main things that we focus on when looking at a new company. Secondly, and this is a bit more for personal preference, but I think fundraising is super tough, and it's a very salesy process where, there's sort of very limited scope for being very transparent. So I particularly like when a founder is, of course, incredibly bullish on what they're trying to build, but they're also very self-aware of what are the pitfalls, and they're confident enough that they can point them out to you as an investor, right? I think there's many things that we investors come in outside in when we perform our due diligence on companies. And it's very refreshing to see a founder that is willing to be transparent enough to say like, hey, these are the 3 things that I think might not work on this industry. This is how we're trying to address them. We still don't know if we'll be successful at that, but we have a pretty good conviction that we'll be able to overcome them. And then I think finally the one thing we clearly over-index on is the quality of the team. I think, unfortunately for us as investors, whenever we're due diligencing a company, we only get a limited number of hours with the management team, right? We have to make the most out of them. But it gives me a lot of confidence when I look at around the team and I see top tier talent, and those people are actually operating and living, a struggle,
to build this.
to build it every single day. And, that founder has been able to, one, attract that talent and then retain it. So there's clearly something there that gives me a lot of confidence when I look at the team and it's top tier.
Interesting when you mentioned around kind of founders carrying out a pre-mortem or a pre-parade, so they can almost say this was what will kill us, and here's how we'll systematically try to remove
It's
it.
very refreshing, right?
Yeah, for sure. Right, it's something that is usually only kept within management teams, not even to the broader company. The opposite, then, what are like red flags that you might see from a founder point of view, or from you see in the process in general that you think should be improved?
I think one of the things I wish more founders did is the industry sometimes loses perspective that fundraising is a 2-way process. We are obviously the ones providing the capital, but good companies have plenty of options, and there's a lot of lack of due diligence on the investors that I think goes on. And I wish more founders spend more time, thinking, who are you bringing on the table? And that person is going to be at least with you for the next 7 years. So there should be a good amount of due diligence that goes into speaking with other people in the ecosystem and due diligencing first the fund, and then who is the person that's leading that investment? Do they have the right fit for what you're trying to build as a founder? And I think that's something that maybe sometimes, because the fundraising processes, they happen so fast that it's difficult for founders to take a step back and sort of ask themselves that question. And I wish more did it.
Yeah, I like that. Sometimes it can feel like the finish line a little bit, and you don't think to go that step further. It's interesting, the companies that I spoke to, who Kinnevik work with, had been obviously very complimentary and very positive and bullish on the impact that you have beyond capital. But they all mentioned that you're very hands-on. So in a board setting, that you like to get involved in the operational details if you can add value. What does that mean to you or to the fund?
Yeah, I think we truly mean it when we say that we want to be the first person the founder calls whenever they have good and bad news. And we truly mean it because, again, going back to the way we're set up as a fund, we particularly well positioned to sort of not panic for a short-term hiccup and rather have that long-term view that, this is a hurdle, we'll get over it, let's work together. And we can be that sense of sort of anchor around the board to work towards that long-term plan, right?
Yeah.
And what that means is operationally, it can mean a million things. It can go from I just came out of a recruiting effort for an executive and another portfolio company. It can be helping your team strategize around their go-to-market strategy, geographic expansion, as we've discussed a few times.
Yeah.
is also something that we are highly involved. But at the same time, we try to let the founder let us know where we can be helpful. And that's where we try to deploy ourselves. We try not to be very opinionated about everything. I think the beautiful thing about venture is that there's not one playbook that works. There's been great companies that have been created with very different strategies, very different cultures, very different approaches to solving the same problem, and all of them can be successful at the same time. And it's not my job to be very opinionated into which one works and which one doesn't, right? So yeah, we really try to adapt to whatever the founder and the company needs us for in that moment, right?
Yeah, it's very cool. I can echo that. I think during my experience engaging with the team, even pre-investment, it was how can we help you with open roles that are really pivotal to the company, like what pipeline that you might have to introduce us. Even as far as your people leader, offering like org design sessions and things like that, which we were in discussion about how best to structure, orientate the company to the next stage. And that was before you even made a decision on whether you're going to invest or not, right? So I think like to actually put that much time and effort up front says a lot about the mindset of the team and the fund.
Imagine how much we're going to bother you now that we're on the inside.
Yeah, I can imagine. So like to the broader kind of founders out there, it's obviously people out fundraising at the moment. What piece of advice would you give to them?
This might sound a bit trendy at the moment, but there's a lot of interest around AI in the investor community. I think maybe a bit too much interest, if you ask me in some cases. But what I would say, and I would encourage every founder out there to be very ready to answer what's their AI strategy and how can AI be embedded into their offering to serve their customers better. I think we are seeing this a lot in vertical software companies that are truly being able to unlock new products that were just unthinkable a couple years ago, thanks to embedding some of that that AI offering. What I would suggest for founders who are thinking about, adding that AI narrative is you need to be very crisp and very clear with your potential investors about what's the ROI of that AI product. So you need to be almost hand-holding the investor into understanding why AI is solving a very clear pain point for your customers and what's the expected value of that resolution. And I expect that to be, hopefully more present in the companies that we look for in the future.
Yeah, it's good advice. So it's how AI solves a problem. It's not the whole solution that you're orientating and trying to find a problem with. It's just here's the problem and this is why it's the best way to solve it. Here's the ROI.
I think particularly for companies that are like yourself, building a vertical solution for a very particular sector, there's so many things that AI unlocks for your customers that it's almost, you need to have a very clear parameter on what's the right ROI before making the investment to deploy, R&D resources into that AI product, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so broad. It could go so many directions. It's make sure you stay focused. Maybe transitioning a bit or narrowing a bit to be more focused on Nory. And obviously we're partners now and you've recently led our Series B investment. What led you to do that? Like, what did you see in Nory?
First of all, we saw an incredibly huge addressable market in the restaurant sector, particularly in the multi-location restaurants that is severely and systemically underserved by the current solutions. It's mind-blowing when you get deep into the sector to see what the tech stack of many of these hundreds of millions of revenue chains actually looks like. And when discussing that with the owners of these restaurants and chains, that's actually how we came into Nory. They were mentioning that it was solving a problem for them that, was increasing their operational leverage so much that was the first point that we had. I think the second thing that really made a difference for us is having a founder that was an insider to the market. I think it's
Feels the pain.
yeah, and I think it's so obvious when you think about it that Nory is the best placed solution to serve the customers because the founder has built the solution for himself in a way with MadEgg, right?
Yeah.
And understands that industry so deeply. And coming on to the third thing that really caught us attention is when you speak with companies, you almost try to very clearly, like you try to see what their North Star metric is. So for some of them will be ARR growth. And for some of them will be number of logos in their platform. And for some of them might be, number of instances that their clients use them on. And when we were talking to you, it was almost you only focused in profitability for your customer, which is exactly what we want to see in a vertical company. You were like your North Star metric. I don't know if you remember, but one of our earlier pitches, earlier conversations, we had this moment where you were walking us through the product roadmap, and we were, okay, how much ACV is this going to add, and how much are going to be able to charge for this? And you were like, sorry, this is going to make 5% margin for my client. This is going to make 3% more margin. This is going to make 10% more margin. Yeah. In 5 years, we're going to be able to do this, and that's going to be another 5% more margin that we're going to give back to restaurant owners. And I think it's very, very important, and it was hugely overstated in our IC how you deeply cared about the profitability of your customers, and that was like your sort of like North Star metric. So when you pair that, huge market with insider knowledge of that market, and an obsession to increase the profitability of a market that is having quite a hard time currently, that starts to look like a great investment for us.
A recipe for success,
yeah,
as you might say. Nice. It just seems so natural for an industry that's so pained to obsess over increasing the margins. If you can make them successful, then we can be successful by default, right? So it's just focused there. So if we get into the process of actually, you touched on things like the IC and considering the investment, and you touched on the market size is important, the understanding of the industry. Nory is at earlier stage than most of the other investments in the portfolio. You mentioned Muse, Travel Perk, there's Pleo, Spring Health. All of these are multi-billion-dollar companies, or earlier. We're not there yet, right? So how did you have to approach this? Was it different than how you would approach a growth stage investment or how you would assess a company?
I think the fact that we have the flexibility to look at companies that are in the hundreds of millions of ARR, and then look at a company like Nory, which is perhaps on the earlier stage of that journey, is very valuable to us as investors. We don't tend to think about investments on a Series A, B, C type of mentality where we are constrain ourselves to a particular letter in the alphabet. Rather, we look for product maturity, team maturity, and commercial maturity, right? And when we spoke with many of your customers, even prior to our first meeting, it was very surprising. Like, they didn't see this as a work in progress type of product. They saw this as a solution that that was already the sort of the backbone to their operations, right? And we typically don't see that in companies that are so early in their journey, and we were instantly attracted to it because we recognize many of the feedback that we get from some of our early investments. So I don't think we would do our jobs as investors if we only thought about artificial stages, but rather think about, is this company already being relevant enough for their customers? And that's what we're trying to solve with our investment here.
I think it's a byproduct of building for the hospitality industry and building for restaurants that they're under so much pressure. And if you're going to be the kind of core operating system, it needs to be robust enough from the outset to be able to be that backbone, or else your phone lines will be taken down with abuse, right? And rightfully so, right? You need to be able to stand up and run the business on it. So you don't have much of a choice. During that session that you touched on, I do remember pretty vividly for a few reasons. When we walked through the roadmap and where we saw the vision of the impact we can bring to the industry and our partners in terms of profitability increases. But there's a few other things that stood out. You'd done a huge amount of pre-work before we even met in terms of speaking to people who are using the product, people in the industry, in the UK, Europe, and the US, doing diligence on our customers, our team, the team members as well, myself. So you had a lot of work done, a lot of depth there. Is that the status quo? How do you approach or analyze companies? Do you try to do that depth of work up front?
Yeah. Again, I would go back to the type of investor that we are, right? Because we run a pretty concentrated portfolio of extraordinary businesses. We need to think very hard about what is the N+1 business that we add to our portfolio, right? So if you've come around Kinnevik in processes, we tend to be more proactive than reactive. We like to think outside in on our investments, and not be constrained by a current round that needs to close in a couple of weeks and we need to move fast. We obviously can do that, but the reality is we much more enjoy having the time to get to know the team, get to know your customers, speak with them, speak several times with them to see how their thinking has evolved over sometimes a couple of quarters. We do a lot of due diligence in the team. I think we probably spoke with at least direct supervisors of 20% of your team back when we were doing diligence, and this really helps us form still outside in, but we try to be as accurate as possible. We try to form a view of who are we trying to invest behind and what are we actually investing behind without it being constrained by, an artificial deadline that somebody else is putting on us. So yeah, I personally take a lot of pride into having the patience to investigate enough into a sector and a company and be able to move when the time is right.
Yeah, it was huge green flag for me.
That also means that we cannot look at that many companies as we would like to, because
it's only so many hours in the day, right? And people. It was a huge green flag for me as well, right? To see the understanding of the company, the space, the team, the depth of the work done. I give a lot of confidence. So moving to kind of post-investment, what do you think is most important for Nory to prove out in the next milestone?
There are a couple of things that I think are very key for Nory in the future. One is, when you look at the product offering, it's super solid and already winning, as you know, against competitors that are 10x your size. I think we need to really double down on the AI capabilities. I don't think the restaurant sector has seen anything like what Nory has to offer yet, but we need to really double down on, putting out that AI capability that will give back time to that restaurant owner, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that development will be particularly interesting. I also think the initial traction in the US is very promising. And I know we have very ambitious plans for that, and we're very excited to support you in that journey. So I think I would highlight both those two things as sort of that short-term horizon goals that we have.
I'm glad we're aligned. I didn't know what your answer was going to be. That was a risky question, but I'm glad it lines up to what I would answer. Nice. I think we're going to flip it over. I think you might have a couple of questions for me.
Finally, this is where I feel more comfortable.
The interrogation.
I think to sort of, we've been talking about how we came to Nory and what prompted that interest from us. But it'd be interesting for you to tell the other side of the story. Like,
Yeah, from our
you know,
perspective.
how do you feel that interest?
Yeah.
Why do you end up choosing us? It was pretty competitive process when we didn't think it would get so competitive. So it's a testament of to the quality of Nory, but it'd be very useful to hear your side.
Yeah, I think you mentioned there's a number of inputs into what makes a quality founder or company, and it's similar for me and for us when we look at a long-term investment partner. So there's probably four things. One is like alignment on the long-term vision, just track record and thematics. There's depth of work and knowledge in the space, and then there's the quality of the team. So I think if you go through each one with respect to Kinnevik, like I was so surprised with our alignment in those early meetings. I think you'd done like some desk research, but outside in for the very first meeting, and touched on what this could be if we execute it correctly and the impact you might be able to have and the markets you could go to, and gave me a really strong sense of alignment that the long-term goal and vision is really tightly coupled and aligned. Obviously, short term, you're flexible on how you get there, and I think you have to be, but that's super important, right? So that gives us a really good confidence as the right partner. Then you go to like track record or thematics. So obviously, very concentrated portfolio. It means you're really considered investors. You really think deeply about who you want to partner with, and you need to make sure that they're winners, right? You don't have a lot of space for people not to reach the potential, which is a good level of stress to have. But no, when you looked at, like we mentioned them earlier, the likes of Spring Health, Pleo, Muse, Travel Perk, you don't get to be lead investors in world-class companies by accident, right? You have to kind of prove your value it to the company, and you have to be able to show up and add value beyond capital. And any of the conversations that I had with the founders of those companies or people who work there echoed that as well, right? So I think that gave us good confidence. Thematics as well, you've shown that you had really good understanding of the playbooks and the challenges of hospitality and travel specifically. I think then if you move into depth of work, I won't go too much into detail. Like what we take from this conversation, there was a lot of work done, the profiling of the team, myself, like customers, a lot of conversations over multi-quarters to understand if we were improving, not improving the market. So it gave me a lot of confidence that you could be an operational sparring partner, so that we could sit there and actually solve problems. You had a really good understanding of not just the market, but Nory challenges and who was involved. And then lastly, quality of the people. So every single interaction with you and the team showed that you're like super quality team, really high integrity, really high conviction, but also really great long-term thinkers and great strategists. So that gave me a lot of confidence and gave us confidence that it was the right partner.
Such an exciting time for you and the Nory team. You know, Series B raise, quite a large amount of capital now. You know, be good to hear are your plans in the roadmap for the next sort of like 12, 18 months on how to deploy that and where to grow.
Yeah, very good question. So I think similar to what you had mentioned earlier, like luckily be a lot, it's back to that line. That's good. Motivated for an awkward board meeting. But no, that was good. I think like we really want to double down on our product strategy and our international expansion. And then I think more specifically, when we look at our product, we've proven that consolidating all the core operations and workflows of a restaurant into one platform and then deeply embedding them with traditional AI and machine learning models has really proven to drive a lot of efficiencies and pretty significant bottom line profitability gains for our partners already. I think what we want to do with the capital up is to enrich our products with the next set of capabilities. So we've started shipping autonomous AI assistants into the product. And what we want to do with those is provide restaurants with a 24/7 workforce of sorts that can help them run their business more efficiently, help them scale out and more effectively. I think to give like a really even practical example, we've shipped two recently that we can touch on. One being guest experience assistance. So we think about helping restaurants in two ways. One is how do you drive traffic, guest traffic, and two is how do you control the cost in the P&L to make sure they're profitable. So you always want to loop back what you're building to those two areas, as you mentioned, back to the impact. And with the guest experience assistant, You're able to analyze all the platforms, review platforms, understand sentiment, offer out operational recommendations to teams on the ground. But you're actually owning the conversing with the guest end to end, automating that process. So one, you're conversing and doing that in your brand tone of voice, doing it in a way that is like SEO laden. So you're actually doing all these like micro additives that are helping the business drive traffic, drive guest sentiment, reducing the time you need to spend actually doing the exercise. And then another one we're shipping at the moment is an operations assistant. So that acts as like a AI operations manager for restaurant managers to actually converse with through voice or text, to ask them questions about how to run their business. And the AI then analyzes the restaurant operations to give them advice on what they should do. And not only that, it becomes a kind of a point of contact for frontline workers in terms of asking questions about the business. So I think it goes back to our theme there of how do you focus on guest experience, driving the P&L profitability, but saving time and just giving people back the hours for like a lot of this repetitive work that they would have had to do previously. So that's a big focus for us going forward.
I think one of the most interesting things that is happening at Nory is we're seeing AI evolve from this reactive dashboard that was great for managers to sort of have a comprehensive view of what was going on with each location or region, to actually these agents providing recommendations actively back to the manager, right? So things like stocking recommendations or proactive workforce management actions. And that is something that I don't think the industry has seen yet. I think the AI piece has been somewhat restricted to that reactive view of what was going on in the restaurant. And for the first time, they're able to, actually have somebody reaching out to them saying, these are 3 things that you could do, and this would be the impact in your net profit margin.
Yeah, it's crazy exciting. We think it's going to be, the next 18 months is going to be a game changer. If you think about it in 2 ways, we talked about big chains earlier, hundreds of millions of pounds or dollars, and you're having a proactive capability to analyze the business to help them run it better. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got businesses who don't even have that skill set. So you're actually creating a skill set that doesn't exist to help them run their business in ways they could never even imagine previously. So super exciting, and it goes all across the business, like HR, supply chain, workforce, the guest side. So I think there's no.
Basically, you're democratizing access to revenue operation managers for smaller restaurant chains, right? Which you used to be able to be at a size where you could hire a team of like 2, 3, 4, 5 people to solely focus on that profitability increases, right? And now you're basically given that in a box for smaller clients, which I think it's very relevant. We've hinted a bit into what is next in the next 12 to 18 months. But it'd be good to hear directly from you on what do you think is next for Nory.
I suppose in terms of milestones, next 12 to 18 months, we touched on some of the product milestones. We've got significant investments there in terms of our capabilities, significant. We look at customer impact, and we have that sliced into layers of impact we want to deliver, and that is effectively products we want to bring to market. So we have a number we want to bring to market over the next 18 months. On the flip side, we've also got growth targets. So we've been growing at a good rate, and we want to continue that. We've set some really ambitious targets. So I think at the end of this year, if we talk about core markets first, we're going to finish with approximately 10% of the multi-location restaurant market in the UKI. We want to 3x that over that period of time to really become the leader in this market. We touched on the US, which is incredibly exciting. It's the biggest hospitality market in the world. It's the biggest market for our ICPs. We want to be a backbone of serving that market for years to come. And you've got some really ambitious targets in the next 18 months about entering into that market and disrupting it.
It's surprising that the word operating system hasn't come up yet in the conversation, right? Because I think the first sentence in our investment memo was, Nory is the operating system for multi-location chains. How do you think that that definition of Nory will change in the future? Like, how do you think the view of what Nory is today will be once you achieve the objectives in the next 12 to 18 months?
When we look at an operating system today, or we look at where we're at today, we think about a few things. We think about like what areas of operations do we handle, do we manage? And that means what workflows do you manage, and then what accounts or what individuals or personas do you deal with? So from finance to HR to restaurant managers. So for us over the next 12 to 18 months, we have a really clear view over what parts of the restaurant we want to be housed within the platform or our operating system on the front line. But we're starting to build further and further into the infrastructure of these restaurant businesses, so that when we think about things like payroll, HR, finance, supply chain, they're deeply embedded at an infrastructural layer within the platform, as well as ensuring that each restaurant is really profitable. So that if you think about it, then when you zoom out, you're covering the entire business, everything from C-suite to senior management to area management, to operation management, to restaurants, to servers, to chefs, to new employees, new joiners. Everybody's operating on the platform every single day, and you become the system of record for each of those people. I think that we have steps towards that in the next 18 months that we're super excited about, because it makes you, it gives you makes you so mission critical to the business, and it gives you such a big responsibility to make sure you're serving all of those personas properly and making sure their lives are okay, and their jobs are more efficient. But you can become a real system of action across each of those areas, where you can start to then plug in those AI capabilities and build out some serious moats as a business data wise. So it's super exciting for us.
I think that that is also another item that came out very strongly when we spoke with restaurant owners in that are using Nory, which is, we would go to the frontline workers at the counter and say, have you heard about this Nory thing? And they're like, of course I've heard of it. I have the app on my phone, and this is how I get the notifications of when I need to get to work. This is how I get my payroll paid. So it was, they were having daily interactions with Nory. And then, we would interview the restaurant manager at the same location, and they would have a completely different view of what Nory was for them. And it was even funnier when we met like the regional or country manager. And for them, they almost didn't know that those use cases existed for the frontline workers, because they were using Nory in a completely different way themselves. And, that being that both a system record on the one side, but more importantly, like system of action for many of those workers that were using Nory very actively every day. That gave us a huge, huge amount of confidence in how deeply embedded within the operations Nory was.
Yeah. You talk about it internally like a Russian doll. That you keep pulling one out, even another use case or persona or person you need to serve. So it's the whole business stacked up.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay, Jose. So now we're going to move into the quick turn, which is a rapid fire round we do at the end of the podcast, where we go through a couple of quick questions. Can be longer than one sentence, but try keep it short. Yeah, for sure. So first one, what is one bold prediction that you have for hospitality in the next few years?
I believe AI is going to have an unprecedented impact in the unseen workflows in the restaurant industry. I think most of the use cases today are constrained to customer-facing workflows. Where I see AI having a real impact is actually on the workflows that the customer does not see that are happening today at a restaurant.
Nice, I like that. What's the most underrated and the most overrated metric in venture?
That's a tough one. I think the most overrated is ARR growth without context, which I think it's very prevalent today. And the most underrated is your churn rate.
Okay, nice. Is that vibe ARR as they call it?
I'll refrain from asking.
Okay. And then finally, what's one piece of advice you give to founders out there raising around the capital?
I mentioned it earlier on the longer interview, but my piece of advice for founders who are currently raising is do your diligence on what type of investor you want and what type of investor you're letting invest in your company, and consequently giving a piece of it. So just, take your time and make sure that you choose the right partner.
Yeah, it's great advice. It's a marriage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll flip it over to you.
So again, mirroring your question, but what are some of the most underrated KPIs and overrated KPIs in the restaurant industry?
Yeah, I know we touched a big thing at the moment is labor productivity or workforce productivity, due to obviously rising operational costs and inflationary costs, particularly here in the UK, but globally. Overrated, we'd say labor cost percentage, because it can be gamed and doesn't tell the whole story. Operators really obsess over don't go above 30%, best in class is 20x%. It doesn't, that ignores all of the inputs around price, cost, shifting dynamics, demand changes, if you hit the budget, miss the budget, all the factors that you just to go into that number. So, and it should be the output of going bottom up around productivity. So I think that's the most overrated, but most obsessed about in the industry. They probably looked at 20 times a day. Underrated, conversely, would be orders per labor hour, which is something we obsess about internally, which is effectively like a stripped away productivity metric. So it strips away the bias that you get from price or that you get from costs fluctuations, and gives you like a uniform productivity metric. So, for example, how many orders does a chef manage per hour in a kitchen, or a front of house server manage across your different sites, and you can see one uniform metric without the bias and really track productivity across the different parts of your business, and then set goals. And I think that that's much more, that's a really underrated metric that's not used enough.
As a restaurant owner yourself, what is the hardest thing operationally about running a restaurant business?
Just takes out the scroll, it opens it up to go through it. You roll it out the back of the studio.
Take the list.
Yeah, exactly. Stand to the list. I think the cost versus culture tension that you have, it's the only industry that I've worked in that is under as much pressure as it is from a margin point of view. That every conversation you have, whether it's in the boardroom, out for a coffee, or in a restaurant floor, ends up being around controlling costs, what happened with the costs. Just operators fixate on it, and for good measure, right? If you don't control it, you won't have a business. But the flip side of that is team members can often feel like there's not a lot of empathy in from an operator point of view or from the business, that they're thinking about them numerically, and it's not the case. It's just the nature of the business. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about what Nory's building, is that if we can remove that pressure and actually realize our mission to double profitability for these businesses, you don't just make the business much better to operate, you make the culture, you revolutionize the culture, because you're not talking about costs all the time. You're talking about like growth, the guests, development. And that's really exciting as well. It's definitely really challenging.
Similar question, but what's the hardest thing about running a venture-backed business, which is obviously very different from running a restaurant business?
Yeah, it's very different. It takes out a second scrolls. I'd say it's running at dual speeds mentally and then just operationally. So if you're going to grow 3x and above every single year, or aim to, that means you need to run the business at 2 speeds. You need to be moving fast enough to hit the plan right in front of you, but you need to be feeding the beast behind it to make sure that you have the infrastructure, the people, the process, everything laid out to make sure you can hit the next stage. That's just the nature of trying to move quickly to win a market, and that's quite challenging. I'd say that's probably every 6 months you're fundamentally ripping apart the playbook and stretching the business and the people and myself. I enjoy it a lot. It's a huge learning curve, and that's one of the best parts about it, but it's also one of the most challenging parts.
I'd imagine dealing with us investors is also on that list.
No, I don't think so. Oh, yes.
Not yet.
Good, yeah. Well, Jose, it was great to have you on. Appreciate the time, and I'm looking forward to working with you.
My pleasure, of course.
That's it for this week's episode of What's Cooking. What an awesome conversation with Jose. We are pumped to be working with him and Kinnevik during this next stage of Nory's journey. And while the Series B is a huge milestone for us and the team is incredibly excited, our mission and our vision has not changed since day one. Our mission is to double profitability in the hospitality industry. We want to tilt the scales in the favor of all our restaurant partners and the operators around the world who are facing incredible margin pressure. And our vision on the back of this is to build the largest restaurant technology company in the world. By making our restaurant partners successful, we will be successful. So here's to seeing Nory in a restaurant near you soon. Until next time.